Hey everybody, this is Mark from the Geek Church here. Now today's episode is going to be an odd one because I'm going to talk about something rather light, and I'm also going to talk about something, well, I don't want to say dark, but I want to say heavy. After all, as you can see in the title, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite shows, something that I really like talking about. And I'm also going to be talking about something that I really don't want to talk about, and that is grief. And as this is going to be my Thanksgiving episode, as I did a Halloween episode a few weeks ago, and I think I'm now to the point where I can do this show kind of once a month, unless I can get some more funds going on. And don't worry, I'm not going to solicit you for anything right now. But if I'm going to do an episode a month, I'm going to pack a lot of great stuff in that episode. And today we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Yeah, I mentioned in episode 12 that I recently lost an income stream. So I've got less time to give the work that it would take to make one of these videos. And just to make a single episode does take a lot of days just to compile it. Hopefully I can start a Patreon soon, and I'll let you know if I get that going. Okay, so let's talk about Thanksgiving. So it's definitely a patriotic holiday, and I have to admit I'm pretty certain that the stories that I heard about this holiday and the big dinner and stuff like that have probably been kind of dressed up over the years. I had my notes to do some research on this, but when I actually did the research, I found that I didn't like what I found as far as how Thanksgiving was founded. But then maybe something isn't about what its origins are in, but rather what it ends up being. Since I'm going to be talking about Thanksgiving, I might as well talk about Halloween. Because the other day when I was out with my son as he was trick-or-treating, I really enjoyed just seeing all the kids of various ages walking up and down the streets, going from house to house, getting candy. And they were greeted at the door with a smile to their face, and it really seemed like something great, like this community was just kind of coming together to really just have a good time. I actually felt some legitimate joy just being a part of it. And I get the same feeling of joy every time each year, when I can sit down with my family at Thanksgiving. I have 2 kids in college now, and I'm so glad we can all be under one roof if we can, or at least just together. We do this thing where we share what we're thankful for, and it was something my family did when I was growing up that I'm kind of glad that I carried on. Okay, I'm going to talk about Thanksgiving from a while ago. This year and month marks the 13th anniversary of the death of my best friend, Ike Egwautu. I've talked about this before in previous episodes, and I wanted to do a full episode devoted to this. Now, about a year ago, I tried to do some sort of video commemorating the loss of this man who really lived a great life, and wish it had been longer. But I found that the footage was just really depressing, and I just decided just not to post it. Okay, but I imagine there's probably here that want to see the whole Smallville thing, and I'll get to that. Just bear with me for a few minutes, or if you want, just speed forward. You have the power to do that. But I do want to talk about my friend Ike, because from the moment he and I met, we had a lot in common from the beginning. I met him at this church I was going to, and we both grew up in Des Moines, Washington. We both went to Mount Rainier High School, and we both worked at the same place, Boston Pizza. And that place is closed. What's it called now? Oh yeah, Barnacles. Anyway, I can't really remember how Ike and I started becoming friends, and we just started hanging out more together. And I'll talk about that as I talk about what you're probably really here to listen to, which is Smallville. Yeah, Ike and I really liked just watching shows that, that were kind of, well, I wouldn't say geeky, but the whole superhero genre has been overplayed now, but it was pretty rare you actually got something really decent back then. So we really like the X-Men movies, and yeah, we really like Smallville, and I'll get to talking about that. So if you haven't heard of Smallville, it's a show about a young Superman, but it doesn't really follow the continuity of any of the Superman comics or the TV shows or movies. It started by doing its own thing, which was a much darker world in this small town of Kansas, as this boy with superpowers grows up to become a man. Now, according to Wikipedia, the original showrunners, Albert Go and Miles Millar, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, actually wanted to do a show called Bruce Wayne about another particular DC hero. I'll give you a guess who that is. Anyway, they decided to do this show about a certain other DC hero, and they established a kind of no tights, no flights rule when it came to this show. And I think that the draw of Smallville was that viewers knew this story was big, that it was going to lead to something bigger, that what you were seeing on the screen and seeing Clark grow up was going to eventually become what we know of as Superman. And we were going to see the whole saga unfurl itself in this thing. Something that hadn't really been done in a Superman show before. Normally when there's a Superman show, there's one pilot episode establishing the origin story, and the rest is Clark at the Daily Planet answering trouble, and then maybe he marries Lois Lane, maybe he doesn't, maybe Lois finds out who he is, maybe he doesn't, something like that. But I think we all knew that how this show would end. Clark was going to put on the tights and he was going to fly. Okay, I'm going to talk about Smallville season by season, as I've watched every episode, some more than the other, and some, I have to admit, I probably might have missed. I don't know why I stopped watching, but it happened around season 10, which was the last season. And I recently watched season 10 just so I could give this series the closure that I wanted before I started talking about it. And I was going to go through each episode, but I'm just going to talk about the highlights of each season, because that's what I really remember after all these years. Believe it or not, I was actually going to do this show about the show Super Friends, and I just figured, like, the more I did that, the more I realized, like, I should probably just devote a whole show about that, because I really wanted to tie this back into my friend Ike, and I will be talking about each season of Smallville and how my friendship with Ike kind of grew over that time. And I think you'll like where this goes, and so hey, for those that like Smallville, this is going to be a great road down this, great trip back down memory lane for those that loved it. And hey, but I really want to share about my friend too. Okay, so Smallville, the show, begins the day Clark arrives on Earth, and we see the spaceship that he's in arriving, and it just sort of assumes you already know the story about how the people from Krypton put him in there. And when the spaceship arrives, it brings with it this shower of meteorites. And this leads to a very expensive and explosive opening that feels right out the 1998 film Armageddon. And this meteorite shower blasts through Smallville, and it kills the parents of Lana Lang, who's this young lady that Clark grows up to be infatuated with. Yeah, this story starts out, I think, in 1989 or something. Anyway, and of course, with the meteor shower, the rocket lands, and Jonathan and Martha Kent are driving along in their truck, and they see this ship, and they see the baby, and I think you kind of know what happens here. Okay, so we jump forward into now, which would have been then 2001. And so Clark and Lana are teenagers, and they're both starting high school. Now, Lana Lang, she's taken directly from the comics, part of the Superman lore, and so is Pete Ross, Clark's best friend. Now, Clark also has a friend named Chloe Sullivan, who is an aspiring journalist who discovers a lot of weird happening in Smallville. And Chloe is an original character that they came up with and actually showed up in the Superman comics for a little bit because she got really popular. And of course, there is Lex Luthor. In the pilot episode, Lex accidentally hits Clark with his car, and it sets two things in motion. First of all, Clark discovers that he's completely invulnerable, which is, he's already really discovered his super strength and super speed, and but this sort of takes it up a notch. And he and Lex also become very fast friends. Yes, Clark and Lex, they're friends in this thing, and Lex is seen as a very sympathetic character in this show. Lex seemed to shake his suspicions that Clark's mysterious survival after the accident, he makes him believe that, hey, maybe Clark is something more than he seems. But he likes Clark so much that he doesn't want to look into it too much. So he often will. But the problem is he wants to know the truth so much. And the relationship between Clark and Lex really is the heart of the Smallville show. And honestly, I'm going to get more into that as I talk about further seasons. Now, Smallville Season 1 was essentially the freak of the week. Because when the meteors basically landed, they became irradiated, and that's sort of kryptonite to Clark, that one thing that makes him weak. I don't know why that happens. That's something that the comic always has just taught us, that, these are parts of Krypton, and now that they're on Earth, they're irradiated. You just buy it, okay? And not only is kryptonite radiation harmful to Clark, but it can give ordinary humans powers. Say, for example, there's this one kid who has a lot of bugs, and he has meteorites with his bug collection, and this infects the bugs that infects him, and suddenly this guy becomes Bug Boy, or I don't know. The second episode of Smallville is kind of like a Spider-Man versus Superman kind of thing. It's just it's a little weird. And there was an episode where like a football coach uses those meteorite rocks in his sauna, and he becomes a guy pyrokinetic. He can make flames. You see what I'm saying? There's all kinds of there's like a meteorite recipe with every origin villain Freak of the Week episode. And then there was this one lady who had meteorite rocks on her skeleton or something like that, and she's like Morph Girl. She can essentially change her image to be whoever she wants, kind of like Mystique on X-Men. And with the Morph Girl episode, Clark discovers a new power, X-ray vision. Yeah, he hasn't developed all of his powers yet. And even with the Freak of the Week storyline, they still tried to change it up and make things interesting, which is what I like. Like there was an episode where this meteorite-infected woman could see the future, and she uses her powers to help Clark stop another meteor freak. Okay, but what really makes this episode awesome is that it shows this lady giving a vision to Lex of the future. And you see her vision, and you see Lex as President of the United States in a white suit, and he walks outside and it starts raining blood. And then the lady dies before she can even give that vision. And it just shows how that Smallville was really looking forward in the future of Clark and Lex. And it sort of teased that we're going to see Superman and Lex, but they're not going to be like you think it's going to be. But there is going to be some great, cool, epic saga to come. And I like the fact that the show had this idea and probably had it in its foundation. Oh gosh, and there's this one episode where this girl drinks these vegetable shakes, and they've been infected with meteor rocks, and she gets thin, but she has to suck the fat off others to survive. It's easily one of the worst episodes of the series, if not the worst. This was an episode that was so bad that when I watched it, I just went like, you know what? I hate this episode. And I think I just sped through to see if it was going to give me anything other than what I was seeing. What was interesting was the Freak of the Week was played by Amy Adams, who eventually became Lois Lane in the DC cinematic universe. Crazy. And like I said, sometimes they had a Freak of the Week, but it wasn't just Clark tries to stop Freak of the Week. Usually, considering one of the critiques about Superman is that he's overpowered. And if Clark is immune to all the attacks of the Freak of the Week, it becomes a pretty boring fight. So they always try to change something up a little bit. For example, there's this really cool episode where I'm not sure, but this guy gets struck by lightning, and Clark is somehow holding his hand, and this guy is in the other hand is holding some meteor rock. So Clark's powers gets transmitted into this guy, and Clark becomes, well, normal. Now in that episode, the Freak is played by Shawn Ashmore, who eventually was Iceman in the X-Men movies, and that episode is overall good because it gives Clark a chance to explore the idea of, okay, what if I am human? And I thought that was pretty decent. Also, Shawn Ashmore is related to another small little cast member. We're going to get there, okay? So yeah, formula was Clark meets someone with this particular power. And for example, there was an episode where Clark met a young boy who has telepathic abilities. And that actually shows up later, but I'll get to that. Now, Smallville was one part sci-fi and it was one part teen drama, and so there was a lot of romance going on. As I said, Clark was infatuated with Lana, but she is dating Whitney, who is the captain of the football team. And not only that, Lana has this necklace that's made up of the meteorite rocks that killed her parents. Yeah, that's weird, I know. But anyway, she constantly wears that necklace, and so when Clark sees her, he often faints when he's around her. It's weird, okay? It's weird. So eventually, I think Clark, by the end of the first season, he starts to date Chloe, which makes the whole relationship between Chloe, Lana, Clark a love triangle. And on the season 1 finale, Clark takes Chloe to the spring formal, but a tornado shows up because it's Kansas, and I'm surprised that's, I think, the only time we saw a tornado on the show, and I mean, they could have had one per week. Anyway, so Clark has to leave Chloe at the dance all alone so he can save Lana. Now, in this finale, they introduce this character named Roger Nixon, who works with Lex, and he's figured out Clark's secret. And he finds the spaceship, the one that brought him to Earth from Krypton, in the Kent's storm cellar. Now, Roger has been investigating the Kents for a while. He even put a car bomb in Clark's truck just to see if Clark would survive the explosion. So now, it was during this time of this investigation that Lex found this octagonal disc, which shows up on the show in a lot of places. And he found that it was alien in origin, and apparently this octagonal disc also has a marking on the spaceship, and so it's like a key. So I think Roger puts the key in the ship, and then the ship flies off, passes Martha Kent, to presumably find Clark. Okay, I should probably talk about Lex a little more, because he's always in the background of any given show, and he and his father, Lionel Luthor, they have a plant in Smallville, so they're making money there, but Lionel seems to know about the meteorite rock and its effects. I think he's kind of in the background trying to find out more information about it, so he and Lionel are kind of also trying to figure out the mysteries of Smallville there. Now, Lionel Luthor, Lex's father, is very abusive, at least emotionally. He's always playing cat and mouse games with Lex. And at the end of the season, tornado, the one that I was talking about earlier, hits the Luthor mansion, and Lionel is pinned underneath some debris, and Lex actually contemplates just letting his father die. Okay, so while season 1 was wrapping up and all that was going on, Ike and I really became friends at this point in time. And as I mentioned before, I really don't know. I mean, it's kind of like some of us, when we have our friends, we have an incident where we became friends with them and we know that. I'm not sure. I remember the day I met him. I remember that we had so much in common, but I don't really remember the day where we basically just said, hey, let's hang out sometime or something like that. I know that we must have, because I remember several times where we did, but I don't remember like the first time or anything. Anyway, so we chat from time to time at church, and we talk about stuff. I remember talking to him about Smallville and how I thought it was such a great show and how there's some really cool stuff on it. Okay, so let's talk about season 2, because it gets pretty interesting here, and I think the show actually really peaked here, if I'm going to be very honest. The best part about this was emphasis wasn't placed on the freak of the week, but rather the personal struggles that was going on, which made the show even more interesting. So, episode 1 of season 2 has what happened when Clark meets with a tornado. He saves Lana by using his superpowers, and he admits later that he was kind of like hovering along the truck as it was going in the air, and he felt like he was flying, but no, he's not going to fly! Because even episode 2 of season 1 shows him floating off his bed just for the heck of it. I don't even know why they even put that in there. I mentioned every subtlety of this show, but I really don't have the time for this. This is going to be long enough as it is. Remember how I said that the ship was going to fly around and find Clark? Well, in the process, it gets struck by lightning, and that octagonal disc sort of dislodges, and that causes the ship to crash and the disc to get lost. Or is it? Yeah, remember that guy, Roger Nixon, that knows Clark's secret? Well, Lex ends up killing him. Dead men tell no tales, because yeah, Lex, that Roger Nixon guy, he was actually working for Lex. And yeah, Lex actually really lies about this. He's just kind of covering his tracks a lot. But the thing is, when Lex kills him, there's this look on his face like you can tell it's his first kill, and he's really distraught about it, stressed out even. And it turns out, remember how Lex's father was pinned under something in the mansion? Yeah, he actually gets out of that. Lex helps him out of it after all, and Lionel is blind. Oh, and Chloe and Clark, they decide to be just friends, much to Chloe's chagrin. I forgot to mention that Lana's boyfriend, Whitney, essentially leaves for the military at the end of season 1, so maybe Lana's free to date Clark? Things go back to normal by episode 2 of season 2, where Clark discovers a sexy substitute teacher that makes him really all get hot. Yeah, this is where he gets his heat vision, and it's one of the coolest effects. They don't show these like little lasers coming out of Clark's eyes, but they show this like weird kind of humidity sort of effect. And there's one great shot of Clark melting a bullet in midair. And I haven't really talked about this, but sometimes the effects on Smallville were very good when they were done in, say, close quarters. Like if there were scenes where Clark had to dodge a bullet, they really spent a lot of their budget in these smaller effects rather than making really big ones. I borrowed a lot from The Matrix. I often felt there was always kind of that thing. Matrix had come out like 2 years prior to Smallville, and everyone was imitating The Matrix back then. So yeah, remember how I said that they didn't know where the ship was after a crash? Well, it turned out it crashed in Pete's backyard, and Clark has to reveal his secret to Pete just to get it back. And I'm going to probably say more about this, but Pete Ross should have been used more. And when Clark reveals his secret, he became a really interesting character, because at the time he was just sort of like this side character that I barely even talked about him in season 1, really. In fact, it actually is a funny story about Pete and his family. There's an episode where we actually see why the Kents don't like the Luthers. Jonathan never really accepted the fact that Clark and Lex were friends. He never really liked it. And apparently Lionel was very instrumental in getting Clark adopted by the Kents. And it's another indicator that he knew something was up with Clark from the get-go. Oh yeah, remember that kid that had the telepathic ability? His name was Ryan, and he's dying in season 2. And only Clark can save him by finding the right doctor. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. And I like this episode because it just shows Clark just not being able to save everyone. I really think that there need to be more episodes like this. Oh, and then there's this one episode where Clark finds out that there's these Native Americans have these caves. They call them Kawatche Caves. And they have these inscriptions on them that spell out a possible future for Clark. And Clark meets a lady who he really likes, and she's a werewolf, and she dies. Not too bad. Oh yeah, and Lana's boyfriend Whitney, he actually comes back for one episode, because it's not really him. I mean, it's the actor, but it's Morph Girl. Yeah, she makes a comeback. And there's a scene where she puts Lana's necklace, the kryptonite one, around Clark, and then leaves him in the cellar for him to die, and the ship is there. And the ship kind of comes back to life and just kind of sucks all the green out of the kryptonite necklace. And then that saves Clark's life. Remember that for later. And then comes one of my favorite episodes, perhaps, of all the series. Basically, Lionel and Martha are at the office of Luthor Corp's Metropolis headquarters, and they're taken hostage. Clark has to save them, and he has to leap from the Daily Planet building to get into Luthor Corp building to do it. And I like how this episode ends, because it shows Clark happily united with his family, while Lex just sees his dad, and there's this great scene where Lex is just looking at the Kent family and just really wistfully, and it's just a very profound ending. Like I said, the relationship of Clark and Lex really made this show, and it has nothing to do with the Superman mythos. That's why it was so good. Anyway, remember that octagonal disc that I mentioned? Well, there was this constant plot line of who's got the octagonal disc in season 2. And apparently Lionel somehow found it because it was in his vault. And Martha, who was kind of working for Lionel at the time as kind of a personal assistant, stole it. And stashed it in a place on the Kent farm. Didn't even tell Clark or Jonathan that she had it. Unfortunately, then Martha gets sick for some reason, but what can heal her is the ship. Apparently, when you place the octagonal disc in the ship, it will heal you or something like that. In fact, the ship used its healing ability on Martha Kent in season 1. And because of that, Martha ended up, she could get pregnant now. She couldn't before that. And she's actually expecting her first child. You go, Jonathan. Now, Clark gets some mail by a certain man named Virgil Swan, a Nobel Prize winning astronomer. I can't remember if he's Nobel Prize, but he was basically an astronomer who told about his Kryptonian origins, and he's played by none other than Christopher Reeve. Probably maybe a year or so before he passed away. You know Christopher Reeve, the Superman from Superman? Yeah, that was him. Let's see. Also, during this time, there was a plotline with Lex meeting this one woman named Helen Bryce, who was a doctor. And they develop their relationship more, but they also... Lex is kind of guarded a lot of times, and it's hard for him to let his guard down and let somebody in his life. And he finally manages to let Helen in his life, and they end up being married before season 2 ends. Oh yeah, Clark and Lana actually become a couple again, because I guess she's over Whitney. And yeah, unfortunately, Chloe does not like hearing that whatsoever. By the time we reach the finale, the spaceship thing, is starting to call to Clark, and it's Jor-El's voice. I must have some AI program in that, and he's calling Clark to fulfill his destiny. But Clark doesn't really think that's the best for him. In watching this show again, I discovered the insertion of Jor-El's essence in the ship is often used as a villain. It was often Clark's resistance that caused trouble here. And it's not that I'm rooting for the ship. In fact, the ship's voice of Jor-El was done by Terrence Stamp, who voiced General Zod in the Superman 2. But apparently Jor-El always wanted to see Clark leave Smallville, but Clark would have to leave his family and friends behind. Clark was not about that at all. All right, so this is where it gets kind of complicated. Remember those Kawachi caves? Well, they actually have this indentation in there that's good enough for octagonal discs. And Lionel assumes it's the same octagonal disc that he has, but he wasn't able to use it before it got stolen. So, oh, by the way, Lionel isn't blind anymore. Yeah, that's it. So, in fact, there's several places in which Clark could have easily revealed himself, because it is not shown where Lionel actually became not blind. They didn't really show that. Lionel was just sort of faking it just so he could go like, yeah, you think I didn't see that? It's just because he's like that kind of guy. I'd say Lionel Luthor is like Donald Trump on crack, but I'm pretty sure that already exists. Anyway, so Lionel Luthor manages to make a octagonal disc of his own, and it's made from the green meteorite rock. So once Clark realizes that, hey, there's a perfectly good octagonal disc made of meteorite rock, he realizes he can use it on the ship. And so he puts that green rock key into that ship's octagonal disc spot, and his plan actually works. Unfortunately, the ship blows up. And it takes a lot with it. Not only does it take the Solar with it, Martha and Jonathan were driving by and they get into an accident. Martha is seriously injured and she loses the baby. You can imagine how much this affected Clark. Anyway, so Clark is really despondent after what happened. So what he does is he decides to leave Smallville. And he really decides to just essentially turn off his conscience. Now, early in the series, I forgot to mention this. Clark discovered that a ring, he wanted to buy a class ring, and he bought this ring that had this red gem in it. Turned out that was red kryptonite. And when he put it on, he became kind of an evil Clark. He became a very self-centered Clark. So I guess he just kind of puts it on to free himself or something like that. And then he leaves Smallville behind. Not before seeing Lana, and even invites Lana to come with him. She refuses. But yeah, it's kind of tragic. And meantime, while this is happening, Clark was actually supposed to be the best man at Lex's wedding, but he didn't show up because of what he was doing with the ship. And Lex did marry Helen, but during their honeymoon, they're in a private jet, and Lex wakes up, and there's nobody else on the plane but him, and he's about to crash land in some deserted island in the middle of the ocean. Okay, so that was season 2, and it was during that time Ike and I really started hanging out a lot, and we would even watch episodes of Smallville together. I would borrow them from a friend of mine who was taping them, and he had them on VHS. Yeah, this is before TiVo or streaming or anything like that, so yeah, that was what we were watching. Also, at this time, my daughter was born, so yeah, that was happening. I actually remember waiting in the hospital because they were going to deuce my wife, and there was a television there, and I turned on, Smallville was on, and I caught that episode called Red. It was the one where Clark puts on the red ring with the red kryptonite for the first time. And after the baby was born, Ike would come over during certain nights. He'd help me take care of Kyrie. I was a new father, and we'd watch Smallville when we could.